If you've started noticing empty shelves or rising prices lately, you're not imagining things, and it's about to get worse. By June 2025, 10 common grocery items you use every day will be super difficult to find across the entire country. Let me walk you through what's disappearing and why. 1. Olive oil. Olive oil, often called the liquid gold of the Mediterranean, is facing an unprecedented crisis that threatens its availability and affordability by June 2025. This staple, cherished in American kitchens for its rich flavor and health benefits, is becoming increasingly scarce due to a perfect storm of climatic, economic, and geopolitical factors centered primarily in Southern Europe, the world's olive oil heartland. Spain alone, which normally supplies about 50% of the global olive oil market, suffered a staggering 48 to 50% drop in production in 2023 due to the worst drought in over 50 years. This decline is not a one-off event, but part of a worrying trend fueled by rising global temperatures that have altered rainfall patterns and increased the frequency and severity of droughts and heat waves across the Mediterranean basin. Spain's olive oil production, which accounts for roughly half of all olive oil worldwide, has plummeted from its usual levels, with the 2023 harvest nearly halved compared to the previous year. Italy, the world's second-largest producer, has also seen its olive crops battered, not by drought alone, but by damaging storms that have further reduced yields. Other key producers, such as Portugal, Greece, Tunisia, and Morocco, are also grappling with drought conditions, compounding the shortage. Even Turkey, a significant olive oil producer, has refused to export its crop, tightening global supplies further. The cumulative effect is a dramatic contraction in the global olive oil supply, pushing prices to historic highs. Over $8,000 per ton, a sharp increase that has translated to an average retail price of nearly $10 per bottle in the US, up from much lower levels just a few years ago. This scarcity is particularly alarming for the United States, which is a net importer of olive oil. Domestic production in the US is minimal, averaging about 16,000 tons annually, while consumption hovers around 390,000 tons per year. This heavy reliance on imports means that any disruption in Mediterranean supply chains directly impacts availability and prices in American grocery stores. Experts warn that if the current pace of depletion continues, olive oil stocks could be exhausted before June. 2. Wheat and wheat products, pasta, specialty breads. Wheat and wheat products like pasta and specialty breads are foundational staples in American diets, providing critical calories, nutrition, and culinary versatility. Yet by June 2025, these items are expected to become increasingly scarce and expensive. Globally, wheat production for the 2025-26 season is forecast at approximately 808.5 million tons, a modest increase from the previous year, largely driven by gains in the European Union and Russia. However, this aggregate figure casts a shadow on significant regional disparities and troubling declines in key exporting countries that the U.S. heavily relies on for both direct imports and global market stability. Ukraine, a critical supplier historically responsible for about 10% of global wheat exports, faces a projected 23% plunge in wheat production to around 17.9 million tons, a 13-year low, due to a combination of severe drought, ongoing war impacts, and economic challenges. Australia, another important wheat exporter, is grappling with severe drought conditions that have reduced both harvested area and yields, leading to a forecasted decline in production. Similarly, Canadian wheat crops, despite having the potential for one of the largest harvests ever, are threatened by disease outbreaks and variable weather, which have caused farmers to delay releasing their harvest to the market in hopes of better prices later, effectively tightening supply. In the United States, wheat production is expected to decline slightly to around 52.3 million tons due to reduced acreage and mild drought conditions affecting winter wheat yields. Compounding this, many major U.S. grain mills are reportedly operating at roughly half capacity because of supply shortages and increased operational costs, limiting the ability to process wheat into flour and other products efficiently. This bottleneck directly impacts the availability of wheat-based products such as pasta and specialty breads. Price-wise, wheat has seen a 7% increase year-on-year amid this uncertainty, and futures markets show upward pressure as traders anticipate further supply constraints. For American consumers, this means pasta, the second most consumed grain product after bread, and specialty breads, which often require higher quality wheat flour, will become more expensive and harder to find by June. 3. Dairy products, butter, milk alternatives. Butter and dairy alternatives will become holy grails by June 2025 for these reasons. Starting with butter, after a turbulent 2024, the market in early 2025 shows a paradoxical situation. Butter prices surged by about 28% since January 2025, reflecting tight supply conditions in certain regions, especially California, which is a major dairy production hub. This surge is notable considering that global butter prices peaked at 8,150 euros per ton in September 2024, but had declined somewhat by April 2025 to around 7,250 euros per ton, an 11% year-over-year drop in Europe. Yet in the US, localized production issues and strong domestic demand have kept prices elevated. The scarcity roots back to several factors. In late 2024, California's dairy production was hit hard by the highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI, which affected milk production and consequently the cream supply needed for butter churning. Comparatively, butter prices remain historically high, and it's projected to be even higher in the coming months. Dairy alternatives such as almond, soy, oat, and coconut milk are also facing supply challenges. For example, almond production is impacted by drought conditions in California, and shipping delays affect soy and oat milk availability. As consumer demand for plant-based milks grows, these supply constraints create scarcity and price increases parallel to those seen in traditional dairy. 4. Seafood. Seafood is a cornerstone of the American diet, prized not only for its flavor, but also for its nutritional benefits, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, lean protein, and essential vitamins. However, by June 2025, many seafood varieties are expected to become significantly harder to find in U.S. markets. One of the primary reasons seafood scarcity is intensifying is the ongoing collapse of global fish stocks. Overfishing remains a critical problem, with more than half of the world's fish stocks, especially those in international waters, classified as overexploited or depleted. Species such as Atlantic cod, hake, and orange roughy have seen dramatic population declines, directly impacting commercial catch volumes. Add this to the ineffective fisheries management and illegal fishing practices, which together erode the sustainability of seafood supplies. For example, the UN Environment Program reports that 66% of high seas fish stocks are either overexploited or depleted. Climate change further adds fuel to the burning fire. Rising ocean temperatures, acidification, and more frequent extreme weather events disrupt marine ecosystems and fish migration patterns, reducing catch sizes and altering the timing of fishing seasons. For instance, warming waters have pushed some species northward or into deeper waters, making traditional fishing grounds less productive. These environmental shifts also increase operational costs for fisheries, as boats must travel farther and longer to find viable stocks. The impact is not uniform. Species like Atlantic salmon and shrimp are forecasted to see only modest production growth of 3 to 4% and 2% respectively in 2025, far below historical rates. Trade policies and tariffs also play a significant role. The U.S. administration's tariff changes and potential trade conflicts with major seafood exporters like China threaten to restrict market access and increase prices. Given that China is the world's largest seafood producer and exporter, any trade restrictions there reverberate across the global supply chain, further tightening availability for American consumers. Experts predict that this will worsen in weeks to come. 5. Nuts and oils, almonds, other tree nuts. Almonds and other tree nuts are facing a complex and critical situation that will make them increasingly scarce by June 2025, especially for American consumers. California accounts for roughly 80% of the world's almond production and nearly all U.S. commercial almonds. However, the state is in the midst of an extreme drought, with water availability at historic lows, forcing farmers to ration water severely. Mature almond orchards, especially in Kern County, require up to 56 inches of water annually to maintain high yields. Yet water allocations have been cut drastically in recent years. Almond trees can survive on as little as 7.6 inches of water, but producing commercially viable yields demands much more. When water is limited, growers must spread reduced allocations evenly throughout the season to avoid severe tree stress. But even moderate deficits can reduce kernel size, quality, and next year's bloom density by over 50%, leading to yield drops as high as 70% in some cases. The 2024 summer heat wave further stressed orchards, and its full impact on 2025 yields is still being assessed. This means that despite acreage expansion, actual productive output could be at risk if drought and heat persist. Globally, other almond producers, like Spain, the world's second largest producer, face similar challenges. Spain's almond production is recovering from frost and drought impacts, but still only accounts for about 373,500 tons annually, a fraction of California's output. India and China produce smaller volumes and are less significant in the global almond market. For consumers, the scarcity means that by June 2025, almonds and almond-based products will be harder to find and more expensive. This scarcity extends to other tree nuts like walnuts and pistachios, which face similar water. 6. Canned vegetables and meats. Canned vegetables and meats are staples in many American households, prized for their long shelf life, convenience, and affordability. Items like canned green beans, corn, peas, soups, tuna, and chicken have long been pantry essentials, especially for families relying on non-perishable foods or those with limited access to fresh groceries. However, by June 2025, finding these items will be like finding a needle in a haystack, and this is why. First, the U.S. canned vegetable industry, which produced approximately 29 billion pounds of canned vegetables in 2023, is forecasted to experience a steady decline in output over the next few years, with an average annual decrease of about 0.59% from 2024 through 2028. This decline is driven by shrinking acreage dedicated to vegetable crops, lower yields due to adverse weather conditions, and shifts in consumer preferences toward fresh or organic produce. For example, fresh vegetable availability per capita in the U.S. fell to its lowest point in over 35 years in 2024, reflecting broader challenges in agricultural production and supply chains. Specific crops critical for canning, such as tomatoes and zucchini, have seen price increases due to reduced planting and higher input costs. This means fewer raw vegetables are available for processing into canned goods. Labor shortages also play a critical role. The canned vegetable industry faces a severe shortage of agricultural and production workers, pushing wages higher and increasing production costs. As a result, manufacturers are forced to raise prices to cover these increased labor costs, contributing to a 10 to 15% price hike in canned vegetables already seen in early 2025, with further increases expected by next month. Packaging materials add another layer of complexity. The cost of cans, lids, and glass jars has risen by about 10%, driven by inflation and supply chain disruptions affecting metals and glass production. This packaging cost increase directly impacts the final retail price of canned goods. 7. Chocolate. Chocolate, often called brown gold, is expected to become notably scarce and more expensive by June 2025 due to some factors affecting its primary ingredient. Cocoa. You see, cocoa production is concentrated mainly in West Africa, which accounts for about 70% of global output, with Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana alone producing over 60% of the world's cocoa beans. However, the cocoa sector faces persistent challenges such as aging cocoa trees, climate change-induced weather extremes, and socio-political instability in producing regions. These factors reduce yield quality and quantity, threatening future supply stability. Although cocoa prices saw a slight decline of about 5.14% in early 2025, the overall trajectory remains volatile due to weather disruptions, labor shortages, and geopolitical tensions. For example, droughts in West Africa reduce cocoa yields, while labor shortages, partly due to migration and economic factors, limit harvesting capacity. The combination of these issues means chocolate manufacturers face rising raw material costs, which are passed on to consumers, making now the best time to buy chocolate in bulk. 8. Specialty cooking oils, avocado, sesame. Specialty cooking oils like avocado and sesame oil are becoming increasingly scarce and will be very difficult to find by June 2025. Avocado oil, in particular, is facing a dramatic supply crunch. Mexico and California, the two largest avocado-producing regions critical to the U.S. market, have been hit by severe droughts and erratic weather patterns that have slashed avocado yields by nearly 43% in recent harvests. To be more specific, the industry has reported a 25 to 30% shortage of avocados through early 2025, with limited supplies expected to continue well into mid-year. Since avocado oil is extracted from the fruit's flesh, any drop in avocado availability directly reduces oil production. California, a key U.S. producer, is expected to produce about 10,000 metric tons of avocado oil in 2025, but this volume is insufficient to offset the shortfall from Mexico, which supplies the majority of U.S. avocados. Mexico's drought and heat stress have led to smaller fruit sizes and uneven ripening, further complicating oil extraction and quality consistency. Sesame oil is facing a parallel crisis. India, one of the top sesame producers and exporters globally, has experienced shutdowns of processing plants due to energy shortages and labor strikes, severely curtailing oil production. Shipping delays from India and other producing countries have further restricted sesame oil availability in the U.S. market. The limited supply has caused prices to spike by over 25% in the past year and is projected to increase further by June. So the best strategy is to shop now. 9. Fresh produce, berries, apples. Fresh produce, especially berries and apples, are projected to become increasingly scarce by June 2025 for the following reasons. First is the severe shortage of farm labor. According to recent research, the number of full-time equivalent field and crop workers in the U.S. has dropped by over 20% since 2002, a decline of at least 146,000 workers. Climate change intensifies these labor challenges by causing extreme weather events that damage crops and shorten growing seasons. Droughts, heat waves, and unseasonal frosts have become more frequent and severe, particularly in California and the Pacific Northwest, where much of the nation's berries and apples are grown. For example, the California droughts since 2011 have stressed apple orchards and berry farms, reducing yields and increasing the need for careful, labor-intensive irrigation and crop management. These conditions also increase the risk of crop failure, making farming less profitable and less attractive to workers. By June 2025, fresh berries and apples will be harder to find and more expensive. The scarcity will be most pronounced in grocery stores that rely heavily on just-in-time delivery systems and have less flexibility in sourcing. 10. Coffee beans. Coffee beans are facing unprecedented scarcity heading into June 2025, largely due to severe climatic disruptions in Brazil and Colombia, which together supply nearly half of the world's coffee. Brazil alone accounts for roughly 35 to 40% of global coffee production, with Colombia contributing about 12 to 15%, making their output critical to global supply and prices. The primary driver of this looming scarcity is the devastating frost damage Brazil experienced recently, hitting coffee-growing regions with intensity not seen in over 50 years. In August 2024, an intense cold front swept through key Arabica-producing areas such as Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and Espírito Santo, causing mass defoliation and damage to coffee trees at a time when they were beginning to flower for the next harvest. Estimates suggest that at least 30% of Brazil's coffee cultivation area was affected, with some regions reporting losses as high as 60% of their crop potential. Colombia, while less severely impacted by frost, has seen its coffee production decline by roughly 35% over the past 5 years due to warming temperatures and erratic rainfall, particularly in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. These climatic challenges have pushed global coffee reserves to their lowest levels in 2 decades, intensifying competition for available beans and driving prices upward. The price spikes are not just a reflection of current shortages, but also anticipation of continued difficulties through 2025 and beyond, as replanting and recovery efforts take years to restore full production capacity. So, what can you do? Start by gradually stocking up on these essentials. Just a few extra cans or bottles each shopping trip can keep you ahead of the shortages. Look for smart alternatives and keep an eye on prices. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.